Yeah, sometimes writing music is something I do when I don't know what to do. It's like I feel like I need to do something and I'm feeling stuck, and maybe it's not that I'm stuck, it's like you get in that place where you're like waiting for the next thing to do. But while we're waiting, this is, I think, the true gift of patience. It's not about being okay with the waiting, it's finding something else creative to do in that waiting.
I vacuum.
Linda vacuums. Rocking out. Well, the title of our lesson today is The Power of Being in Our Center. In our center. This is something I've been talking about for a few weeks, the idea of how we are either in conflict or we are in our center. Now, when we are in our center, this is when we are the antidote for the experience of conflict that we might have in our life. And to be in our center, this is about being in our Christ consciousness, being in the Christ mind. The teacher Yeshua, he knew how to move into his Christ consciousness. That's why he became known as the Christ, and why he could go about doing all the work of his Father, because he was in that higher consciousness. So when we allow ourselves to be in our center, what we're doing is we're becoming the way of the living God in this world. We become the activity of God in this world. So God, good, love, uses us and works through us and out into our life. When we are in our divine center, we can look around and see the truth of God in all things. Right? If God is all things and God is infinite, that means there's nothing out there that did not come from God. God is all things. When we can see that God is all things, then we can also see that when we see the truth of God in all things, then we can also see and be open to seeing the activity of God can happen in surprising places. Solutions can come into our lives from surprising places. So we are either in conflict, so we're either in the storm of our life, or we're in the eye of our storm, which is our divine center, right? Our sacred center. Now, if we're in conflict, what that can look like in our life is just focusing on the bad stuff that's out there. But conflict, no matter what is going on in the world, the conflict starts in our heart first, because we've moved out of a place of faith. We've moved out of our center, so we are now in the way of God working through us. Conflict always starts within us. Now, in our own lives, what conflict might look like is maybe not getting along with somebody, and then going to another person and complaining about them, or judging them, or criticizing. Right? Conflict, it can look kind of mild in our own lives, but what about in the world, like our global village? What would conflict look like in the life of a world leader? What would conflict look like in the life of a head of a giant corporation? Exactly the same as it looks in our life. But we're working within the package of our life, and the package of our life is not an entire country. The package of our life is not a big corporation, unless you've got some little secret here that I don't know about. All right, so conflict, though, is conflict. And so whether it's a world leader or whether if it's somebody from a small town like Yucaipa, anyone who is experiencing conflict is in lack consciousness. They're walking by sight. They're not walking by faith. Anyone who is in conflict is in the way of the activity of God being able to work through them. They are in the way of the living God. They are in the way of potential solutions. They are in the way of divine inspiration or guidance as to that next best thing to do. And that next best thing to do, that might be the thing that changes everything in our lives or the life of somebody. So conflict is conflict, no matter who it is. If we're in conflict, we are in the way of greater good coming into our lives. We are in the way of being a source for good for other people. Now globally, and I'm just noticing it this last couple weeks, because a lot of people are noticing globally there's a lot of conflict happening right now. And it might be that we are experiencing global conflict to a degree that we have never experienced it before. So here's the power of being in our center. I want to hold that baby so bad. I'm sorry, Leanne. I gotta take a baby break. I'll be right back. But here's the power of being in our center. When we are in our center and we are being the activity of God in this world, then we're seeking the truth of God in all things. If we're seeking the truth of God in all things, even conditions that we think are crazy, and even within people that we think are maniacs in this world, if we're seeking the truth of God in all things, then we're making way for solution. If we are in our center, in the eye of our storm, that peaceful center, then we're calling forth the good into our lives and into the lives of other people who are around us. From our center of power, this is where we remember. It is our purpose, like the big encompassing purpose, the biggest purpose we have in our life is to remember that we are here to be the way that God works in this world, to be the way of the living God, that we are the avenue through which God's good comes into this world. When we forget that, what are we letting into our lives? What are we putting out there into the lives then of other people? So being in our centered self, it starts right here. And you could say that what we're doing is we're managing our garden. We're tending our own garden. You know how gardening, like I don't garden and I wish I even wanted to garden, but I don't. But I love to talk about our life, the package of our life, as it's our metaphorical garden. And we tend our garden. We plant the seeds. We pay attention to the seeds we're planting. Am I planting seeds of love and compassion and creativity? Am I planting seeds that allow me to be of greater service in the world? Because I planted so much here, now I can share it with other people. Oh wait, there's weed. This is how we also tend our garden when we're in our center. We notice the conflict. There's a weed of limitation and fear, and I pull that weed. That's what we do when we're in our center. We notice when our own metaphorical garden is getting weeds and we need to do something about it. We go into conflict when we forget about our own garden and we start looking at everybody else's metaphorical gardens. I was like, you planted what? What are you thinking? It's February. Nobody plants that in February, right? Do you see all the weeds you have there? Don't you think you ought to do something about that? So when we're busy trying to manage everybody else's gardens, guess whose garden gets ignored? Our garden, our own garden. Thomas Crum, he's an author who wrote a book on conflict, and I think he gives a lot of conflict resolution seminars too. He said, centeredness is a true psychophysiological phenomena that affects everything in your environment. So psychophysiological, that's thinking, our way of thinking, right? And then the physiology of the brain, or the body. Our centeredness affects how we think and how our body functions. And then how we're thinking affects our environment, which is the package of our life. It's the people that we interact with on a regular basis. Or even just the people we interact with one time and never see them again. That's the package of our life right there. It's affected by our centeredness, our ability to be able to be centered. Now globally, I know things seem to be escalating, like conflict seems to be escalating. And it's because we're being bombarded and we're seeing it everywhere. But if we are not in our centered self, if we are not being the activity of God in our lives, we will turn into maniacs about all the stuff that's happening out there. Like absolute maniacs. When we are in our centered self, and we are being the activity of God in this world, we can look out there and see the conflict. We can see things we don't like. but we observe it. We don't try to get all up in somebody else's garden. Instead, we observe it and remind ourselves, okay, it's okay if we don't like what we see. It's okay. But it's telling us, come back to center. Don't keep focusing on what you don't like. Seek only the truth of God in all things. Seek only the truth of God. This is why prayer is such a big deal here at Unity. Like Unity in general, our big thing is prayer. And of course, because prayer aligns us more deeply with the infinite within. But when we pray, when we pray, and not how, I'll say my grandma used to pray, right? It's like, I pray for this baseball team to win, or that guy to get president, or whatever, or just erase this person off the planet. That's how my grandma taught me to pray when I was a little kid. Well, just ask God to make them move. But when we pray to seek the truth of God in all things, when we pray, it's like to acknowledge, I don't know what's going on out here globally. None of us know. We really don't know. We don't know what's going on globally, so we pray. Help me seek the truth of God in all things. And then we open the way for solutions to come through that. We open the way of the living God to act through that situation. So this is why prayer is powerful. It's not just about the people we know. Our prayers can affect things on a global scale. So if we are feeling conflict, and I know last week when I first heard about what was going on, in the world, one of my friends happened to text me and just dump a bunch of news on me that was why she was all in the drama about it, right? So I was this all last week, right, for a couple of days. And really, when we go into conflict, if it's something big like that, like what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, sometimes we don't know how do I even act? What do I even do, right? Please, dear God, just bring peace, right? But actually, we handle any conflict, whether we're experiencing, because remember, conflict is starting here. Our conflict is starting here. And we handle the conflict we feel about a situation happening on the other side of the planet the exact same way we would handle conflict with somebody who's in a room with us. We seek here. We go here first. We seek the truth of God in all things. We ask, okay, am I busy focusing on somebody else's garden right now? Is that my problem? Gardening's hard work already. To have to run around and try to fix everybody else's garden too, it's got to be exhausting. So that's what we're doing. No matter what the conflict, we go here first. We recognize the conflict. We recognize we're in conflict because it feels terrible. And if we can gain awareness or trying to control and change things out here, then we know we're in conflict. And so then we can take responsibility and go here. We seek the truth of God in all things, and however we get there, right? And for me, again, it's God is all things, and that means me. Now, in the last 2 years, we have had more uprisings in the last 2 years than I think we've had in the entire last decade. Maybe the last 2 decades. I don't know. So we could say conflict, it has gone global. Our experience of conflict has gone global, even though we're just being bombarded with a lot more now than we were 10 or 20 years ago. Carl Jung said, much of the evil in this world is due to the fact that man, in general, is hopelessly unconscious. Hopelessly unconscious. And so if we look around at, think of anybody who you think is a maniac about what's going on. Now what's going on is maybe they are struggling and hopelessly unconscious. Although I know if I've decided somebody's a maniac and they need to be acting differently, I'm the maniac and I'm the one who's unconscious in that moment. So that's me. But consciousness, our consciousness, this is the antidote for global conflict. Because we're all connected. If God is all things, that means in the quantum field, we're as close to the people in the Ukraine, we're as close to the people in Russia, we're as close to the people in New Zealand as we are to each other in this room right now. So consciousness is the antidote for that global conflict. each of us, we are the antidote for that global conflict. When we are the way of God in this world. When we are the activity of God in this world. And you know what? We've been training for this, right? I know, like I would say, like when I started taking classes here back in 2000, right? I always felt like I was learning for some reason. Of course, for the longest time, I thought I was learning about all this spiritual stuff so I could just feel good about myself and tell people I'm so spiritual, right? That's what I really thought my goal was, just to be cool and wave my spiritual flag at everybody. But actually, we're doing this for each other. We're learning all of this for each other. That is our purpose in becoming conscious, is to have a greater awareness of the truth of God in all things, even in things on the other side of the planet. To have awareness of the truth of God in all things on a global scale, not just in the package of our life. Really, the package of our life is expanding to be global. It's something that's different now than ever has been before. When we are recognizing, and I know I'm saying this over and over and over again, but you know how long it took me to I had to say it over and over to myself like 1,000,000 times. When we are the activity of God in this world, we are living a life that honors how we are all one. When we're the activity of God in this world, we're recognizing all are one. Because God is all, and we are all connected, even to the people that we would call a maniac in this world. Even to people we think are crazy and they're doing it all wrong. We are breathing with everybody. We are breathing with the people we don't like. We are breathing in with the people from New Zealand and from Russia and from Ukraine and from Canada and from the Philippines. We are breathing in this life with everyone on this planet. We are really global. So here again, the power of being in our center, right? This is the power of being in our divine center, recognizing who we are and who sent us here in the first place, or what sent us here in the first place. That we're here to see all this just as an opportunity to put all this stuff to work. That's what it means. If you cut your hand, you wouldn't just stare at an open wound and lament about the pain, let it drip blood all over the place, and blame like the thing that cut your hand. It's saying, clean me up, bandage me up. That's what the wound is indicating, right? That's its signal to us. So when we're experiencing conflict is showing us where we need to show up more in our own lives. Where we need to show up more in our own heart and in acting out and living this belief system. To really live as truly being part of the whole. When we're conscious of our power in the whole, then together we're spreading the good. Now this is a math problem that I can't solve. But I heard like a mathy spiritual person talking about this. If one person is living from their heart, living in this consciousness, they expand their territory. They double the area that they can be of good and serve, right? But then if someone else is also doing it, they also double their territory. But when we do it together, like if Linda is doubling her territory and I'm doubling my territory, then she doubles my territory and I double her territory. But then Taylor comes in and he doubles his territory. And then he doubles my territory that's already been doubled and doubled and doubled. This is why where two or more are gathered. Right? We're bringing so much more into this world. So here, if anybody figures out that math, let me know. Because that'd be kind of cool. And give it a unit of measurement. I would like that too. Kilowatts of love. Kilomegas of zillion. Okay, whatever. Here's our affirmation for this week, right? Here's our call to action and our affirmation. I'll say it and then we can say it together. I seek the truth of God in all things. I seek the truth of God in all things. All things. You know, this week I would wager that we could probably find a lot of things to point our fingers at, right? To judge, to condemn, to criticize. he should be doing this thing differently, and they should be doing this thing differently. We, the U.S. should, or the U.S. shouldn't, or the U.S. ought to, right? If we're busy pointing our fingers, this implication is that, well, I know better. And if we get into a place where we're thinking, well, I know better, whose garden are we in? We're not in our garden, that's for sure. We don't know how the divine plan is unfolding in other people. We don't know how the divine plan is unfolding in other countries. We don't even know how the divine plan is unfolding in our own country. So we start here. There's not enough of us to go around to all the gardens that we'd like to point our fingers at. So we start here with our own garden. And this is actually the way that we can become like a gardener, or we can tend the garden of our entire planet. This is how we do that. It's not by going out there first. We tend the garden of this beautiful blue marble that we call home by going into our heart first, by going into our centered self first, seeing the activity of God first in our own lives. We start with us. It's our responsibility. Because we know every time we are caught up in the conflict, we're walking by sight. We're not in faith. And it's faith that grows us a big life. It's faith that expands our territory. So if we're not in faith, we're not calling forth any good into our own lives. If we're walking by sight, our own garden is getting all filled up with weeds. And it takes a lot to go back and try to clean up something that you've been letting weeds grow in for a lot of years. I know that. We are growing a greater awareness right now, a greater awareness of things that are happening globally. And in this awareness, in this new consciousness that we are all showing up in, we can now, it is totally possible for us to observe that we just went into conflict. We can observe that now. We can observe how it's showing up to show us something, to show us where we need to show up more in our own lives. And then here's where, again, we take responsibility one more time by deciding, okay, I don't want to be in conflict. I don't want to be stuck in this thing out there. I don't want to be worrying about that guy's weeds, right? I want to be here in my own life, even though I don't like what's going on out here. I know that I'm more good from right here. So we make the choice. All right, I'm going to go into my center self. I'm going to remind myself God is all things, and that means me, and that means the people I think are maniacs, and that means the people that I'm judging as heroes. Right? God is all things, and that means me, even when I forget who I really am. We seek the truth of God in all things. Now, when we seek the truth of God in all things, everything changes. The world changes. What we see in the world changes. Like where we didn't see love and compassion before, all of a sudden we see love and compassion. So we see the activity of God. We see how it was eluding us before. There has been a trend in storytelling over this at least since 2010, but I actually recognize it in some of the cartoons my kids used to watch when they were little, like the Transformers cartoon. I don't know if you have kids, but everybody's heard of Transformers. But this trend in storytelling, when I was a little kid, there was the good character and the evil character, right? There was a really clear definition between good and evil. My mom read Grimm's fairy tales to me, or the Disney stories, right? There's a clear line between good and evil, a clear line. Now, what's been happening is that there are stories, and there's a villain in the story, but all of a sudden the villain's really not what they seem. The villain has turned out to be somebody who's struggling with a black hole of conflict in their heart. Like there's a character in the Transformers cartoon that struggled between good and evil. And I've been re-listening to Harry Potter, and there are characters in there, and you think they're heroes, and they're not. And the villains you think are villains, they're not. The villains are struggling with that black hole of conflict. Not being able to quite move out of it, not being able to stop walking by faith, not trusting or walking by sight. They're not trusting that they are the way of the living God, that God uses them as the activity in this world, that good uses us as a channel. The villain cannot remember this. But then all of a sudden, there's somebody in the package of their life that's in their centered self, and a little bit of their light shines into the black hole of conflict in the villain, and then something just kind of starts to break open for them. That's really what's happening in our lives. All of us have a little villain in us. All of us have that storm in us. All of us have the potential for conflict. We could choose any of that stuff. But we also have within us a conscious being, the infinite part of us, ready to just open wide the doors and the gates to call forth the good into our lives. If we are in conflict, if we are not in our centered self, and in our centered self, this is where all the power is. When we're in conflict, we've lost all of our power, and we're judging, and we're condemning, and we are blaming, and we're getting in the way of good coming into our lives. We're getting in the way of the divine working through us. We're getting in the way of that instruction, telling us the next best thing to do that could potentially change everything for us. We get in the way of that. When you're in conflict, you're not getting it done in your life. When I'm in conflict, I'm not getting it done in my life. Now, I'm not okay with that. I don't think you are okay with that either. Like, we're here to get it done. We're here to call forth the good. Our world is in transformation right now. And this transformation is about moving out of a system that does not work. But there are people in that old system who are trying to force it to keep working. But we're moving out of a system of power over others, which is to control people and get them to do what you want them to do. When we're in conflict and we're trying to make something out here change so we can feel happy and we can be safe again, we're trying to control outside circumstances. But see, it's not just us. At this point now, it's corporations and it's governments. It's conflict on a global scale. And because it's creating more conflict and more uprisings, we can see that way of doing things, of trying to make people do a certain thing, that doesn't work. That's an old way of being in this world. Trying to control other people instead of going here first. That is the new paradigm that we're moving into. Calling forth the power through us, the power of good, the power of love, the power of compassion. That is a harmonizing power, right? Love is the universal harmonizing power. It is an attractive force. It's a uniting force. And we are here to be united. We're here to stand shoulder to shoulder with each other. We are here to be a rising tide, right? So people who are still struggling and not quite getting it in their own lives, well, there are others around to lift them up. And if we happen to be having a bad day, there's somebody there who can lift us up in that moment. So this is what is happening globally right now. And this is why the power of your spirit is so important right now. In your center of power, you are a force for good. In your center of power, all that you do resonates out into the quantum field, right? Scientists are talking about this now, right? The quantum field is like the field of energy where everything is connected. I call it God, but a scientist would call it the quantum field. This is why, we are so interconnected. This is why we really don't want to send hate mail through our internet, right? Can you imagine if we're sending hate mail, thoughts, through our internet, and it's piling up on these world leaders who, half the planet hates, they're being crushed with this. And that's our responsibility. If we're sending out hate thoughts, that's on us. So we're here to gather our own internal resources to let the good work through us. So what we're sending out into the quantum field is a blast of hope and love and faith, forgiveness, empowerment. Every time you choose to live your life from your centered self, that's what you're doing. Like you are sending a blast of good juju to someone. Every time you choose to live your life from your centered self, you're being a love amplifier and a grace generator in this world. And this is how we are creating heaven on earth. So until next time, remember that you are a force for good. You're designed to do all of this. You are designed to be the way of goodness and love on this planet. And you are designed to send those prayers out to affect us on a global level. Right? You're designed for this. So in everything you do, you are blessed, and so it is.
So it is. Amen.
Thank you.